Hi, welcome to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we have an amazing show ready for you tonight. We have special guest Thomas Edward, who's going to be on the show a little bit later. But yeah, this is our inaugural show, our very first show that we have ever had, and we are beyond excited. So this is kind of how it all came about, if you're not familiar. Courage 365 started out as the Courage Conference about 4.5 years ago. In 2016, my husband and I, we had this idea to do the Courage Conference to get a space for survivors and advocates and people who love survivors to get in the same place and hear inspiring survivor stories, hear from mental health professionals, hear from survivor advocates. And it was just one of those things where, you know, your intuition tells you, like, this is what you need to do. I'm a survivor of abuse myself. And if you're not familiar with my story, I'll probably go into that in the future and when the future shows a little bit. But I was, in the process of recognizing some of the abuse I had experienced, and I began talking about different parts of my story and about abuse, and people started reaching out to me who had had very similar experiences, and they were saying that they felt so alone. And so I was like, you know what? My intuition is telling me that we need to have an event because I'm hearing from hundreds of people saying that they feel so alone as a survivor, but I know they clearly are not alone because all of them are reaching out to me and saying basically the same thing. So I was like, you know what? We are going to have an event. And that's how the Courage Conference was born. And we've been doing this event for 4 consecutive years. It's an annual event where people come in from across the country, even from outside of the country. That's been so exciting for me to hear that people aren't just coming from the local community, but from all over, because survivors like myself, we need that community and connection so we don't feel alone. And so that event was very successful and has been successful for the last 4 years. But with 2020, as you all know, COVID-19 happened. None of us were expecting this. None of us were prepared for this. But it has caused the Courage Conference to have to do some major pivoting. And part of our pivoting, something that we actually had been working on for a little bit before COVID-19 even came upon us, was not just doing events like the Courage Conference, but shifting into a bigger organization where we have more offerings. So we have the national conference, but then we're also working on community events. But with COVID-19, all of those events had to be postponed to 2020. And my husband Will and I, we were talking, and it's like, this is so disappointing. We know survivors more than ever need that feeling of connection and those inspiring stories and connections to resources. What can we do if we don't have a live event this year? So that is how the Courage 365 show came about, was realizing we need to show up for people because this is one of those times where domestic violence is on the rise. Child sexual abuse is being reported at higher numbers, and we want to show up and bring empowerment and courageous speakers to talk about how we can all work through our healing journey, how we can all get connected towards resources that we need. So every week on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be streaming the Courage 365 show. We're going to have so many different guests. You're not going to want to miss an episode. And while this particular show is just being streamed to Facebook, starting next week, we are going to be streaming to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube simultaneously. So you can watch anywhere in the world. You can choose the social media platform that is most comfortable for you, and you can tune in to our weekly programming. This is something that you can begin to expect and look forward to. And I'm really, really thrilled that this is going to be a new venture for us. Our sponsors got behind us and helped us create a studio. And my husband, he's actually the one that built this great background, and we're testing out some new equipment. So bear with us if there's any technical issues. Just know that we are going to continually get better and better. But our goal is to provide you with a top-notch TV show style production to watch every week that is really going to inspire you. And before we get into our interview for tonight with special guest Thomas Edward, I want to just stop the show for just a second, and we're going to have a word from one of our sponsors. And we'll be right back in just a few seconds to talk with Thomas Edward. Welcome back to the Courage 365 show. I'm Ashley Easter, and I have special guest Thomas Edward here on the show with us today. Hey, Thomas, how are you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be on the show. Hey, I was thinking, I'm like, okay, 2016, that was the first time we met, and here we are again, right?
I know. Yes. No, Thomas has been with us from the very beginning. He was our in our first speaker lineup, and last year in 2019 he was also at the Courage Conference again. Yeah, Thomas, you have been such an integral part, and that's why we're honored to have you on the show today. Oh my goodness. And for those of you who are not familiar with Thomas Edward, like, this is a man you want to follow. I'm telling you, he is an amazing advocate. He's a survivor himself, and he has an organization called Empower Survivors, and he works with coaching men who've experienced sexual trauma and other forms of abuse. He has an incredible story, and he's also an incredible coach. He is the picture of resilience, which really is our topic for tonight. For this show, we're going to be talking about resilience. But yeah, he's somebody you're definitely going to want to follow. We're going to give you all his social media so you can kind of stalk him there online, but in a good way,
Yes.
But Thomas, would you just give us a bit of background about you and just like the nutshell version? I know you have like a huge story, but just let the viewers know about you and then the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, so I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and my abuse took place pretty much from age 6 to 15. And I have about 8 or 9 perpetrators, of course, in my story. And the abuse occurred like weekly. So if you're doing the math, that's a ton, of course, unwanted, sexual abuse that took place. But my healing journey kind of started around 27 years ago. And I remember when I started on this journey, there wasn't much understanding of sexual abuse, and especially
Right.
for men. And so there I was sitting in my sessions and stuff. And intuitively, I was just thinking, you know what? There's something more to this trauma stuff than just being locked in my mind. It's
Yeah.
also locked in my body, right? Which is
Mm,
interesting because now that's what research actually shows that it's not just about the mind, but it's also in the body. So I had to, overcome a lot of different things where I couldn't be touched. I didn't have boundaries. It was difficult for me to have lasting relationships, to actually trust people. And like many other survivors, I was medicating myself my own way, trying to, of course, get through the pain. And so
mm,
when I think about that, what happened is, and this is why I always tell people, just hold on for one more day because you just never know what's going to happen. And I held on that one more day. And then, of course, my life began to change. And it was at that point I started soaking up knowledge. So I started studying psychology and counseling and a degree there, and energetics and nutrition, cognitive thinking, all the different type of things started to help me in my actual healing. It actually accelerated my healing journey. And because of doing those things 27 years ago, and then starting to do workshops and writing books and holding seminars all over the world, my healing started to become very complete because I was doing what we call an integrative approach, even before integrative was actually even coined.
right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Um, so that's kind of how you got into the coaching field then, like really born out of your experience and kind of hitting this wall and being like, this is not serving me. Is that right? Is that kind of what brought you to what you're
Yeah.
doing now?
Yeah, that was definitely it. And it was interesting because, as you know, I was doing one of my degrees in psychology and counseling. We were all sitting around and we were talking about, okay, what are you going to do with your degree once you finish it? And most of my friends and colleagues are like, well, I'm going to be a licensed, therapist and stuff. And I said, well, I'm already coaching people. And I said, what I'm noticing just from my own experience and background and working with guys, that the coaching route is actually helping us, to maybe because of the stigma and stuff behind sexual abuse
Mm,
men, but actually it seems to be the way that more men are actually responding. So it's not just
wow.
talking about it, but it's taking all these different multifaceted areas and integrating them into the experience of healing. So that's the reason I chose to go that route.
That's amazing, and I've heard from some other coaches that that's kind of their reasoning too. Is there is a lot of stigma around therapy, and so even just you've got the degree, but even just calling it something different can sometimes help people break that down. And I mean, people go to coaches for all kinds of things, for business to,
Hmm.
you know, just relationship stuff to abuse to, so it's kind of like one of those things where you could go to coaching for anything. So saying I'm meeting with my coach today is a little bit less intimidating maybe for some people.
Yes, yes. It does take a little bit away of the stigma. And oftentimes I have individuals who actually come and coach me because they don't want that stigma, whatever, on their records or whatever, saying that they went
Right.
to a therapist. So, so I help in any way that I can. But of course, if it's out of my scope of practice, then I just refer them to somebody who can handle where they're at
Excellent.
on their part of the journey.
That's excellent. And I think that's so important for all people who are advocates. Even if they're therapists, like there are, like there's different lanes we need to stay in, and we need to know
Yeah.
what we're good at, what we actually are qualified to do. And like you said, if there's something that doesn't fit in your lane, you're really
Mhm.
quick to refer out. And I really wish that more professionals would do that, because what I see sometimes is that people are like, oh, I've got this covered, I'll figure it out. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, this is somebody's life.
Yes,
um,
exactly.
yeah, be the best that you can with the skills you have. And when you see that somebody isn't in that lane that you're working in, like referring out, that's really admirable. And I think makes you even more trustworthy as a coach, because you really have your clients' well being as a priority.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
to me, I see it as we're not competing against each other, right? What we're doing is
right. Yes.
we're complementing each other. So my work is complementing someone else's work. Someone else's work is complementing, because people are coming at different points of their journey, right?
Hmm.
And so you're trying to make sure that they're well rounded. So you want to give them different pieces during the parts of their journey.
For sure. Yeah, I know that, I personally have done therapy and coaching, and
Hmm.
both of those have been really meaningful to me. And I wouldn't trade either of them. Like they were so valuable. They had a little bit of a different side to them, but
Right.
super, super helpful. And one thing that came up for me when you were describing the type of work you do is you said, of course, like psychology, but you also mentioned energetics. Could you talk
Yes.
to us a little bit about what that means? It sounds a little woo, but let's go there because I like woo.
Okay. So let me share with you where that comes from. Okay. So remember I talked about I was sitting there with a therapist and I'm like, something is just not connecting with me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. So I put the therapist on hold and I traveled to the Shaolin Temple in China. Okay.
Mm,
Because I'm into martial arts. And so when I got there, they looked at trauma actually probably from a different non-Western perspective. And
right.
so while I was there, what they did was they put me in this room, and you've heard, the gongs, the monks, and during their chantings. And so they did the session with me, which was really called, we call it now sound frequency. And
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
did that with me, it brought up a lot of the memories and stuff that I couldn't even recall. Right.
Mm,
It was so powerful. I'm like, wow, there's something behind this. So I actually went back to the temple and I studied with the monks there on doing sound frequency with the
interesting.
singing bowls, with the singing bowls.
Yes.
And so that put me on the whole trajectory of energetics. So now part of my coaching, I do, sound frequency and those different type of things, and helping people and just helping them to realize that when we're talking about who you are as a person, it's more than just mind. It's mind, body, and spirit, right? And so we need
Mm,
all those things when we're talking about healing and trying to become complete. Yeah, so it's been a
Makes
great
sense.
journey.
Wow. No, that is so cool. And I found that for myself too. And for those listening, if you hear the word spirit and you're not religious, you can also think of it like as your subconscious mind. Like you have your
Yeah.
conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So there's like some science wrapped around that. But at a retreat that me and my friend Rachel Grant did, the Emerge retreat, we had a sound healing experience. And you're right, like music and sound does help us connect
Yes.
deeper. And something that it brings up for me is when I was going through like a really hard time, coming out of abuse and trying to figure out what to do, there were certain songs on the radio that really spoke to me and
Yes.
really meant something to me. And years later, I cannot be thinking about that experience at all, but I hear that song on the radio and it brings me
Yes.
right back to it. And so it makes sense to me that using sound as sort of a helpful thing to bring memories to the surface so we can deal with them appropriately, that makes so much sense to me. And I'm glad that you have such a holistic approach. It's so awesome.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not so if you want
Mhm.
to say be afraid of woo woo energetics and stuff. It's just the way that people explain things. So there's still science behind it, right? So
Right.
we know that when your brain is exposed to major chords, we know that
Mm,
different, neurotransmitters and things are released in your mind. When
yeah.
your brain is exposed to things in minor chords, it actually releases more serotonin, so you become more reflective. So there's actual science behind it too, even when we talk about energetics.
That's great. And I think that eventually that kind of stuff is going to be more mainstream, but I see
Hmm.
recently that it's starting to, really get paid more attention to. So it's so cool that you've been in on this much earlier than, everybody's still catching up. It sounds like you're really like cutting edge.
Uh,
But yeah, our topic for this show today is really about resilience. And I was wondering if you could talk to me about what you think of when you hear the term resilience, what that means to you, and maybe that's a reflection of some of your own experiences, but maybe it's just a definition. I would just love to hear your thoughts. And just for the record, when I have heard your story in the past, I think of you as one of the most resilient people that I know. And so I'm really interested in what you think about this concept. Thomas, are you still there? Looks like Thomas cut out for a second. So hopefully he will be right back. Maybe we're having just a little bit of internet issues. Oh, here he is. Thomas, can you
am I
hear me?
back?
Yeah,
I
you're
can hear
back.
you.
Welcome back to the show.
Okay, thanks. Hey, this is the new world that we live in, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, no, I said thank you for saying that. Someone else just said that the other day, Dr. Lysek, who works with 1 in 6, and he's like, I know a lot of the stuff that you've been with. And he says, I look at you and still can't see how you smile so much with all the
Mm,
trauma that you've been through. So
yeah.
resiliency to me means that despite the odds, it means getting back up. It means joining the fight, joining the struggle, joining the battle, but knowing that there's going to be victories and knowing that there's going to be wins. And when I
Mm,
approach resiliency from that perspective, it's easier for me to have this smile on my face because yeah, when I start sharing my story with people, like their hair starts falling out. They're like,
yeah,
"Wow,
yeah.
how could somebody endure that much?" So resiliency, we all have resiliency. We have the capacity to recover from our difficulties,
Mm,
to have that toughness. And here's the thing, even when we talk about resiliency,
mm.
neuroscience has even shown that resiliency can be learned, right? So
Ooh,
if you're thinking like, oh, there's no way that I can become resilient, neuroscience shows that actually it can be learned. And one of the
mm,
reasons, like I said, I choose to coach because I'm a survivor of resiliency coaching. That's what I do, is because what's important for me is that with resiliency as a survivor, you get to own it. And the reason you get to own it is because you're the one doing the work. So that's what
mm.
resiliency means to me.
Wow. So it's kind of, from what I'm hearing, like resilience is believing that there is something better up ahead, that there's going to be wins for you, and then taking back the power really to decide um, what's going to happen next and how you can step into your power and resilience. And looks like we maybe just lost Thomas again, but I think he made some really important points here. Because I think sometimes this idea of resilience can be something where you feel like it has to be given to you from external sources. But from what I'm hearing from you, Thomas, it sounds like resilience is something that comes from the inside that you can cultivate. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I believe that it's both. I always think of things from this perspective. It starts as an external source. When you take it in, believe it, and work with it, it becomes an internal force. Okay.
Say that again for us. Say that again.
Okay. So it always starts as an external source. It comes from an external
Mm,
source. So it could be a friend lifting you up. It
right.
could be whatever, a book that you read. But when you take it in, you believe it, accept it, and work with it, it becomes your internal force.
Ooh,
So
that
it's
is
both.
powerful. My goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes, yes. Keep going.
So when we're talking about resiliency, that's it. And that's because we're all connected. And that's why it says external source. Something also has to be poured into us in whatever way that it
Mm,
is. But then it's up to us to take that, to cultivate that, to culture that, and then turn it into that internal force that moves us forward.
powerful, powerful. And so, as a coach, if somebody came to you and really had a lot of trauma in their past, they've experienced abuse, and they're like, I want to be able to be resilient. I don't want this to control my life forever. I mean, of course, we can never completely erase what happened in the past, but like,
Right.
what if they're at a point where they're like, you know what? I want to start focusing on an empowered life. What three tips would you give them? Like, what are your top tips for becoming a resilient person?
Okay. There's tons, but I'll give you the ones that I actually start with when I'm working with and
Yeah.
coaching with survivors. The first one is you have to embrace change. Okay.
Mm,
Now, change is a constant, right? It's inevitable, right? So, our current lives in this pandemic is showing us that change is real, that it happens.
yeah.
Now I'm having to move from more physical face to face to more digital web conferencing.
Mm-hmm.
But change sometimes can be challenging and it can be difficult for us. Now, here's a perspective point. I don't want you to think that just because it's challenging and difficult that it's bad.
Right.
Unfortunately, we've been kind of raised in a society when we think about challenge and we think about change to look at it from this perspective. We want high impact with the least amount of effort.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's really true when we look at
The reality.
society. Yeah.
And so, in order to get that, though, you're going to have to put in the work to do it. And so you're going to have to embrace the change. Let me just give you a quick story here if I don't keep cutting out on you and talking about this. So I was working with a survivor and I was coaching him. And he had this remnant issue, excuse me, in his abuse history. And he couldn't change his kid's diaper because every
Mm,
time it would trigger him.
yeah.
He just couldn't do it. So he'd been working with this therapist for like 7 years, and it's like, man, it's just not getting to the point. I'm not achieving what I want to. They
Right.
were on kid number 5, and he
Oh,
hadn't
wow.
changed the
Wow.
diaper. He hadn't
Mm,
changed the diaper from number 1 to change to child number 4. And his wife she had just had enough, right?
yeah.
So when he came to me, and I always work from a strength based perspective, so I help survivors to identify their strengths and then use those strengths when we're coaching the issue. So his strength was music. He was just awesome with music because he would write jingles and stuff for radio shows. So this was the assignment I gave him. I said, okay, so I want you to create a song about all the things that you can actually change.
Mm,
Now, at the end of the song, however your lyrics work out, I want you to put these as your last words. I can do it. I can change the poop, right? Because it was the baby's diaper. Okay.
right.
So he came up with this song, right? And I said, I want you to sing this song. It needs to last about 45 seconds. As your wife is changing the diaper, I just want you to sing this song. And then I wanted you to gradually start changing the diaper yourself and continue to sing the song. And it was pretty cool. It was something like, I can change a tire, I can change the oil, I can change a light bulb without any toil. And then he gets down to the end and he says, but my wife wants me in the loop. So that means I can do it. I can change the poop. Okay.
Good.
So he did that. And 2 months later, he calls me and he's crying. But he's crying in celebration. He says, my wife, she has the other kids with her. She had to go somewhere. She left the little toddler, whatever, with me. He had an accident. I had to change the diaper, and I was resilient and I was able to do it.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So he
And
had
that's such an
embraced.
out of the box method. I mean, that's
Yes.
amazing. Wow.
Yes. But he had to be prepared to embrace the change. And that's why I even put
Right.
those words there at the end of the song for him. I can do it. I can change the poop.
Yeah, that's
Right.
amazing.
All right. So the second one, though, and we talked a little bit about this. So embrace the change. The second thing is you got to be optimistic. And let me tell you, and I'm going to kind of just say this for, especially for my African American friends out there. This is a really hard time for us to be optimistic.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you see the news and what's going on, with George Floyd and all those different type of things. But we've got to find a place of hope. Okay, optimistic. I'm not talking about, the whole world is rainbows and unicorns.
Right.
When I talk about optimism, what I mean is, one, there's this desire, right? But with this desire, there's an expectation that it's going to be fulfilled. So like
Right.
with him, he had the desire that he wanted to change that diaper to be able to do it, but he also had the expectation that he was going to fulfill it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really important in our society because we live in a society where we're socialized so often to just move towards the negative so quickly that sometimes it's difficult for us to be optimistic. And then the third thing, when I'm coaching with resiliency, here it is. You got to have a network, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got to have that sense of belonging and acceptance. And one of the problems I notice, at least for me as a survivor, when I'm working through things or other guys, is that we try to attempt to solve the problems by ourselves. And when you do that, you limit your possibilities because you only have so much knowledge, so much strategies. And once you run out of that, where do you go? So
Right. Right.
it's really, really important for that. Let me share with you one more story here right quick.
Please.
So I was working with an individual and I was coaching him, and just depending on whatever plan they have with me. So I get this call at 2 a.m. in the morning, and this person, he's struggling with, of course, one of his assignments, and he doesn't know what to do. There's a family event that's taking place. There's people in the family that are toxic, and they're going to be there at that event that's going
That's
to
a big
take
one for
place.
survivors. Wow. Yeah.
Yes,
Happens all the
at
time.
that event. And so what he does is, of course, he gives me a call, and I said, okay, so this is your assignment. I need you to call 3 other people in your network and then just share with them the story. And then just ask them what would they do. That's all. Just ask them what would they do.
Wow.
So he did that, and then give me a call back and let me know what you're going to do. So he called, he got their feedback, and then he called me. He said, you know what? I've decided I'm not going to go to the event, but I'm going to let the family know the reason I'm not going is because of this. So now he was actually putting boundaries in place.
Right.
But he wouldn't have been able to do that without having a network. So I think those 3 things, so first, of course, as we said, you've got to embrace the change. 2, you got to be optimistic. And 3, you've got to have a network. Those are my top 3. Yeah.
That's really powerful. And I can definitely say for myself, having that network of people, so whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coach, whether it's my husband, whether it's some other survivor friends or advocate friends, like I cannot imagine being resilient without having people to say, hey, I'm going through this. And sometimes it's their direct advice, but other times it's just, even if you don't do exactly what they suggest, it's just getting the story out and telling somebody what you're going through. It gives you your own aha moment sometimes.
Right.
And allows you, like, I think sometimes, particularly with family events and things, there's this whole idea that, like, well, blood is thicker than water, so it doesn't matter what they did, they raised you. And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to have anything to do with this situation or with this person just because we're blood related. We need to respect ourselves and set up the boundaries that make us feel safe. And yeah, sometimes when I've told things to friends, they're like, "Whoa, that's a really big deal," and I'm like, well, I kind of thought it was, but I needed somebody else to like affirm that I'm not just like losing it. I mean, it feels like a big deal. Am I overreacting? They're like, totally not. And so, yeah, that's so important. And I'm really glad that you also touched on George Floyd and his murder. Really, I view it as a
Yeah.
murder. And it's, I find myself not even having words and afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing, but I just in my heart I grieve. And would you talk a little bit more about when you mentioned resilience in a situation like that? Um, you know, I would just love to have a little bit more idea of how can we expect change to happen? How can we be active change makers in situations? Because this has to stop. And I think you're right. If we only focus on like this is always the way it's going to be, no change is really going to be inspired to happen. But how can we be resilient in a situation while not being like, oh well, everything happens for a reason, because that's not helpful in this situation. How
Yeah,
can we
not at
be
all.
resilient and yet not overlook the seriousness and the pain of this?
Yeah, this is one, and I mean, this is one that's like it's been on my mind.
Mm,
It's like, man, how do I handle this? How do I process it? And that's the first thing I just want to say, that make sure that you're allowing yourself to process it. Whatever emotions and stuff that you're feeling, allow yourself to feel them, because oftentimes what we do is we try and shut these things down. And the thing is, emotions are created for us to actually, experience them, to work with them.
mm,
When I think about the George Floyd, I think, far as resiliency, I think this one kind of goes to the third point, network. But I think in this case, what it needs to be now is not just reaching out to our network, but we need to reach out to our network and ask them to stand for us and to start
mm,
doing something. When
mm.
I think about the George Floyd situation, as an African American, this has just been part of the history of actually living here, being here for 400
Yeah, yeah.
years. And so for me, it's like, well, it's just I've seen it, I've grown up with it, I've lived with it, and of course that's
Mm,
traumatic too. But then it's at the point where it's like, not finally, but now it's getting to the point where, look, we've been saying this, it's going on, it happens, it occurs.
right.
And now those that are part of the network need to stand and say, we see it, we're with you, and now
Mm,
we're going to help do something about it.
mm.
When we talk
Yes.
about resiliency from this perspective, I think that number three of having the network and the network actually engaging is what's going to help us to work through
Mm,
this.
absolutely. And maybe as a white woman, me not reaching out necessarily to like what I've sometimes seen done is white people, maybe with good intentions, start reaching out to African American friends and are like, really hounding them with questions. And a lot of people are grieving, but it's maybe more reaching out to my network of other white people and saying, hey, did you see this? If you haven't, you need to realize that this happens and we need to do something about it. And we can't just put this on our sisters and brothers of color to be the ones to fix it. Like, this is our problem. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I had a friend who asked me that question. They're like, what can I do? And I said, are you really serious? And he's like, yeah. I said, go to your community college. And I said, I just want you to take one semester of African American studies.
Mm,
I said, just do that. And I said, once you start learning all the information and stuff of going on and seeing not only how they were treated, but the different achievements and things that they came
yeah,
up with
yeah.
and that weren't given credit for, that were stolen from, then you'll start to understand a little bit more and have more empathy, right? And so he's like,
Mm,
wow. Because I start talking about stuff and like, oh, I never knew that happened. Oh, I never knew about
yeah,
the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's not actually taught in history that is part of our
right.
American history.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful. And I appreciate you being willing to have this conversation. And just everybody watching, we had a discussion before this, so we're not just like throwing this, I'm not just
Yeah.
throwing this on Thomas. We, wanted to be respectful of where he is in his process. But yeah, that's a really, really great idea, because I'm learning things every day that I didn't know and that wasn't taught to me. And so that's really excellent advice. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
And I think this subject is so relevant to the concept of abuse and healing and all the things we want to talk about on the Courage 365 show, because truly, the racism, that is trauma, that is abuse,
Yeah.
and it's not a separate issue. They're one and the same.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, there's different facets and things to be looked at from, you know, each different type of abuse has different facets to it, but this is definitely an abuse and atrocity that we want to create change in. So thank you for discussing that. And the next question I have for you is really, with this whole COVID-19 thing that we have going on here, I think a lot of survivors and victims, things are coming up for them, whether that is being in the middle of a pandemic and then seeing another murder of an African American man, whether that's being in a pandemic and feeling like, oh, I used to be trapped in a situation and I got out of it, but I'm being triggered because I feel trapped again. Or maybe it's wearing a mask. And while we know that that is safe protocol, maybe it reminds them of a strangulation. What are people going through as you're talking with clients and things? What are the stakes of what survivors are experiencing during COVID? But then also, like, what are some strategies and tools? Maybe this has to do with resilience, or maybe it's something completely other. But I would really value your wisdom on there. And I think our viewers would too.
Yeah, so I'll share with you what I've been experiencing in the past, going to say 3 months, and working with survivors and what's been coming up with them, or the concepts that have been triggering them as victims and survivors of abuse. And the first one is really it comes down to this idea of loss of control. So
Yes.
once again, many feel that they're being placed, they're being subjugated into spaces where they have no control. And this is really crucial for abuse survivors, because our abuse occurred when someone else used, they controlled either our bodies, our minds, our emotions, whatever, to our detriment for their self satisfaction, for power and control. So
Yes.
there we are in that arena again, and people are trying to figure out. They're like, "Well, why am I? Why am I feeling like this?" And I asked them. I
Mm,
said, "Do you feel like you have a lack of power and control?" They're like, yes, someone's telling me
mm,
whatever I have to wear a mask, or someone's telling me I have to shelter in place. And once again, I feel like someone is controlling me.
right.
So that could be one of the issues when we're talking about, well, how is COVID actually triggering individuals? Another one that I've been running into also is rumination. All right, I
Mm.
know that's a psychology term, but I'm going to take it back down south to North Carolina and put it in the terms that we used to say, chewing the cud.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Chewing the cud, right? So, the cow eats the food, it goes into the first stomach, the second stomach, then it goes back to the first stomach. And so that's what rumination is when we're talking about that. What often happens, at least during this COVID, that I'm noticing, that people's their minds get filled with one single thought, or maybe a string of thoughts that just keep repeating and repeating. And what happens is this process of continually thinking about this same thought, so there's no change, there's no variety. It actually tends to sink people belongs, and it intensifies the sadness, the depression, the despair, because often what times does is it impairs our ability to think and process the emotions. Okay,
Mm.
so it causes us to feel even more isolated. So when I'm working with this, and I notice this, especially of survivors, what I notice oftentimes is that we haven't really taken the time to really work through some of the crucial
Yeah.
issues of reclaiming our life. All right,
Mm.
but what can I do about it?
Yeah.
Okay, what
Yeah.
can we do about it? Right. All right. So I'm going to say for these two that we talked about, one, distract yourself. Now I'm talking about healthy distraction.
Right.
Okay, So if you realize that you're ruminating and you need to find what we call a distraction break in your thought cycle. So, like you said, one, I can call a friend or a family member, start doing chores and things around the house. As we talked about before, I'm gardening like crazy,
Yes, yes, that's awesome.
right? Because it helps me to not ruminate,
Mm.
to just have those thoughts running through my head continually. Read a book. Now, I'm going to give you this last one, and I want everyone, if you can, to possibly do this and use your, of course, social safe distancing, but take a walk for 20
Oh,
minutes.
yes, yes.
And I want you to do what I call the 5-5 walk. As you're walking, I want you to find 5 beautiful things. And I just want you to acknowledge that they're beautiful. And then what I want you to do, the other 5, so 5 and 5, I want you to find 5 things that you are grateful for. And that's
Mm.
because neuroscience shows us that when we start actually thinking from a grateful perspective, that we actually start releasing more dopamines and things actually in our brain that actually starts to give us that uplift.
Yeah.
Okay. So 5 and 5. If there's nothing else you can do, you don't got any chores or whatever around the house, please try the 5 and 5 just for 20 minutes and get out there and do that. And here's the other thing. This is what I'm running into oftentimes, that survivors aren't realizing and understanding actually what their triggers are.
Mm.
And so they find themselves ruminating, they find all these mental note situations taking place, but they haven't really found out what their triggers are, right? And so
Right.
I really want to encourage you, to do that, to go maybe a little bit deeper, if you have the time to figure out what those triggers are. Yeah.
Wow, that is so powerful, and I'm a huge fan of walking. It's been raining here for the last couple of weeks, so I cannot wait to get outdoors again. But I can attest that it makes a big difference. And friends, we are going to be right back after a quick message. Right back with Thomas. We're going to ask him a couple more questions, so stay tuned.
So there's choices that you have the opportunity to make. You can either stay with your abuser or you can leave. And make no mistake about it, it's going to be hard either way you go. But I can tell you one thing for sure. If you do decide to make that courageous decision to go, there's hope. So much hope.
Hey everyone, we're back with the Courage 365 show, and I am here interviewing Thomas Edward. He is a coach, and he specifically engages with male survivors and helps them find healing and freedom. And we just had an amazing discussion, and I want to just ask you one more question, Thomas.
Sure.
And this one, I would love to know, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received? What is that thing in all of your years? You have so many certifications and so many trainings and courses that you've been through. What has been like the most life-changing piece of advice that you've gotten?
Okay. And I don't know if it was advice, but it was words. And so this came on the heel of me, before I got to that point where I actually started working on things, and uh, my abuse and all the scars and things that had come up from my childhood. If you would have asked me from age 6 to 15 what was my childhood like, there was a time where I couldn't tell you because my mind had just blocked out, so many different
Mm.
things. But I remember, I was on the precipice of just thinking it wasn't worth being here. It wasn't worth living. And I remember being at a friend's house one evening. I remember I was just crying and just pouring my heart out to him. And I remember him just, saying to me, he's like, "Man, I'm so sorry for what happens to you, but you just got to remember that I love you, that I love you." And he kept saying
Mm.
that. And I was like, "Okay, that's great, but I'm getting ready to leave." And he was like, "No, no, no, I just need you to stay here." And he says, "When you wake up in the morning, I just need you to remember that I love you. Before you do anything,
Mhm.
I just need you to remember those words." When I woke up the next morning, the first thing that came to my mind was, this person has said that I love you. And it was that changed the rest of my life. So this was the
Wow.
piece of advice that came from me that I always give to survivors as I'm working with them. Hold on until tomorrow, because tomorrow might bring something totally new, something totally unexpected, and something totally life changing.
Mm, that is amazing. Mm. Thank you so much, Thomas. You have given us so much wisdom. We're so grateful for your expertise. And I know people are going to want to follow you. They're going to want to get to know you and your work a bit more because you were just dropping wisdom bombs all over the place. Tell us how can people stay in touch? What's your social media, website, all those things?
Yeah, so website is simple, and I made it simple so you can actually do safeplaceformen.com. That was the original name, so I went back to the original name, safeplaceformen.com. Also, if you're going to get me on the Twitter space, it's the same thing, the Safe Place for Men, so you can reach me there. Facebook, it's Thomas Edward, so at Thomas Edward, Heal Broken Men. And I just want to let you guys know that actually on June 9th, I'm actually doing a webinar, and it's called Why Did I Freeze During the Abuse? So for those of you that want more of the neuroscience of what was going on, so that you can help understand a little bit more that you're not to blame, but there was stuff that was going on inside of your mind, and that the reason that you froze has nothing to do with you. It's just how the body reacts. Feel free to join us for that webinar on June 9th.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And everybody, you are definitely going to want to tune in for that training. As you have seen in this short show, Thomas is amazing. He's got more things to share. He is definitely worth following and keeping in touch with. And I want to invite you to come to our social media pages as well for Courage 365. We have Facebook, which you're watching right now. Please give us a like so you can stay updated on new shows. Follow us on Twitter. It's just at Courage365 and Courage365 on YouTube. Next week, we're going to be streaming to all 3 platforms. And share this with a friend. Share about Thomas and his work. Share this show with people in need. Just click the share button right now. You can do it. Click the share button. I'd invite you to come on over to the courage365.org website. And if you do that, just for coming to our website, you'll be able to see a list of resources there. Thomas's website is listed on our site, but just for coming to the website, we want to give you a special free gift. That is our new ebook, which is 5 keys to living with courage. It is free, completely free, just for you for coming onto our website. I want to thank Thomas one more time. And everybody, I just encourage you to continue living in courage and stay tuned for next Thursday and every Thursday after that, 7 p.m. Eastern, where we'll be continuing the Courage 365 show.